Hello, my name is Emily Wilson, and this is my poetry analysis of Stephen Dunn's After Making Love, published in 1996. So, a little bit about the poet. He was born on June 24th in 1939 in Forest Hills, New York. Unfortunately, he died on his 82nd birthday, which is kind of sad, unless you think of death as a transition instead of eternal death. So, depending on how you look at it, it could be nice. Anyways, he got his bachelor's degree in history at Hofstra University in 1962 while playing basketball, and then he worked in advertising for a little bit before he moved to Spain, and then to write a book, but then he never ended up finishing it, so he moved back to the United States after he quit. Just kidding. He got his master's degree in creative writing at Syracuse University in 1970, and then he taught at Stockton University for 3 decades, which is crazy, starting in 1974, which is when he published his first work, and then all throughout his teaching career, he published lots and lots of poetry, as we will see. And he also taught at various other universities as well. As a poet, he was very interested in the more mundane parts of the social, cultural, psychological, and philosophical aspects of the American middle class, or quote-unquote common man. After reading a lot about him and watching a lot of his YouTube videos, that I'd not like to admit how many I watched, he's very into psychoanalysis and psychology, which I am also, so this ended up being perfect for me. So very up into the psyche, and you can see that a lot in his poetry. He's had over 15 major poem collections, and I won't talk about them all, but his biggest one, or more popular one, is Different Hours, which he got the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for, and then he won an Academy Award in Literature from the American Academy of Arts, and then 3 national endowments for various fellowships. So on to the poem itself. It's titled After Making Love. No one should ask the other, what were you thinking? No one, that is, who doesn't want to hear about the past and its inhabitants, or the strange loneliness of the present, filled, even as it may be, with pleasure, or those snapshots of the future, different heads on different bodies. Some people actually desire honesty. They must have never broken into their own solitary houses after having misplaced the key, never seen with an intruder's eyes what is theirs. So what I like to call poetry housekeeping, basically all the things that we learn about poems in a poetry class. It's very important. There's an unnamed speaker, and it's someone who's had this experience before, and he's made up his mind about it, and he's addressing the reader about his own conclusions of that experience and how you should act in it. But he's also kind of having this dialogue with himself as well. It's a very dramatic monologue. It's free verse, so there's 8 uneven couplets with no rhyme scheme. It's broken up, it's strange, just like this strange loneliness he talks about in the present. There's no real pattern, and there's kind of breaks where you wouldn't normally think there's breaks. So it's kind of interrupted, I guess. The tone is informal, a little bitter, I would say, very melancholy, but reflective. And then there's also a little bit of assertiveness to it. He's made up his mind, and he's telling the reader, this is what it is. The themes are love, about relationships, loneliness, self-knowledge, honesty, intimacy, and presence, which is a lot for a shorter poem. But I think he does a really great job of touching on a lot of themes in the 2 things that he kind of talks about. And the only imagery we get is from the title, After Making Love. So we can imagine like two people laying in bed. Like I imagine them having their backs, like laying on their backs and just looking up at the ceiling and just being in that post not fun sex, just awkwardness when you're not in love with that person. So we can kind of have that imagery, and then breaking into your own house, which we'll talk about later, using the psyche as a house as a metaphor. So the interpretation, there's a total of 4 sentences, and it's broken up into 2 parts. So there's a declarative sentence, and then there's an explanation, kind of, and then there's another declarative sentence with another explanation. So the first part is that first sentence, which is, no one should ever ask the other, what were you thinking? And that's because they weren't enjoying that moment. And it's like, the other person should know that they aren't enjoying that moment. It's kind of like an unspoken rule or a mutual agreement. It's what I imagine in today's society as like being in a situationship and then asking that question, well, what are we? It's you wouldn't want to know what I'm thinking about in that moment because I wasn't thinking about you. Right, so he goes on to say that he was thinking about the past and its inhabitants. So those people from his past are still inhabiting his mind. And I'm saying I should be saying they because it's a speaker and we don't know the speaker's gender. So that's my bad. So every time I say he, I'm saying they. Or they're thinking about the strange loneliness of the present. So even though you're physically with someone, in all other aspects, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, you're in another world. So you're not present with them at all. And even though there is the pleasure in that time period, they're thinking about the next thing, right? So it's kind of like that dopamine hit that we get. But a lot of times when we're doing that quick fix, we're still thinking about the next quick fix. So he's kind of talking about that in as well. So that's the first line. And just wanted to note, so even when he's talking, like even when he's in the moment of that intimacy with that person, he's thinking about the next person, the different body. Okay, what's the next face I can look at? The next different head. So he's thinking about the past, the not so great present, and then the future all in one while he's having this moment of intercourse. So obviously no one should ask him what he's thinking. And then so there's that first half, and then the next half is another declarative sentence, which is, some people actually desire honesty, but those people must have never, and then ... So those people must have never actually been honest with themselves. Because if they had been honest with themselves, then they would not want honesty from other people. Right, so this is where the poem kind of shifts from talking about sex in that short time after to kind of talking about honesty with oneself. Because that part where, it says, they must have never broken into their own solitary houses after having misplaced the key. I kind of see that as they must have never gone into their own subconscious mind or their own shadow after being unconscious or misplaced the key. They've never seen with an intruder's eye what is theirs. So they've never taken that seat of consciousness where you're the witness and you're taking that other perspective or that other point of view, being an intruder, so not being, you, not me being Emily, but taking that witness point of view and being honest with themselves and seeing what is theirs. And I imagine that the speaker in this time is still in his dark night of the soul, and he has been honest with himself, and he's seen all of his stuff, and he hates it still. I think we've all been there. And if not, get ready. So he's still in that time of he doesn't like what he's seen when he's been honest. So he's saying, if you actually desire honesty, you should know what real honesty is, and you don't want it. And so after that moment of unintimate intercourse, no one should be asking that question, because everyone knows what that honesty is, or those people should know what's coming of that honesty, which is them not being present because they're not into it, because they're still hung up on an ex, because they're trying to fill a need, because they have deep self-worth issue, whatever it is, why they're having casual sex. That honesty, no one wants that. No one should be asking, what were you thinking? So, brief conclusion, he starts off by saying, you shouldn't ask me what I was thinking about during intercourse because you know that I was thinking about my past, I wasn't present, and I was probably thinking about the future as well. And you may think you want honesty, but if you were really honest with yourself and if you really knew what true honesty was, then you wouldn't be wanting my honesty. Because you wouldn't like what you saw in your honesty, or and you wouldn't want to know about mine, or you didn't like what you saw in your honesty and you probably assumed that my honesty is just as gross as yours. Sounds like the speaker needs to do some integration work. So some cultural and historical context. In the latter half of the 20th century, we had the 60s sexual revolution, so one-night stands became more common, casual sex became more common. That openness really expanded while Christianity declined as well. So sex just became more okay, I guess. And then the Eastern philosophy also made its rise in the 60s as well, with more talk about being present and whatnot, while Freud and Jungian psychology also expanded, so the psychoanalysis of the subconscious and the shadow and integration and all that stuff also grew outside of just the scope of therapists and psychology. And so he kind of uses those two, the increase of casual sex, Eastern philosophy, and psychoanalysis into one poem, talking about the lack of connection in that what's supposed to be an intimate connection. But then also that could kind of be seen in America as well, just us kind of becoming more and more closed off and less intimate as peoples, for a lot of reasons that we won't get into. I really appreciated doing this work for him. I really appreciated learning more about him, and I highly recommend that you guys check him out, more of his stuff too. And I really appreciate you being here with me and watching the video, and I wish you all the best luck in your projects.